Hello, everyone. We will continue in our Bible study through the book of Psalms. Now we come to Psalms chapter 75. Here's what we are to do, and I think we do this. This is a chapter that is a wonderful chapter, Psalm 75. As you will see as we go through here, Asaph is writing a song, and you're going to see him write about not himself necessarily, but about God and David and about what he as well as all of us should do. Psalm 75 in verse 1, Unto you, O God, do we give thanks. Unto you do we give thanks, for that your name is near, your wondrous works declare. Give thanks, and continue to give thanks. When I shall receive the congregation, I will judge uprightly. Well, I don't think Asaph was receiving the congregation and judging. He's talking about David here in a song for David, about David. And David did judge uprightly. The earth and all the inhabitants thereof are dissolved. I bear up the pillars of it. Or, I firmly set it up. So there he's talking about God. I said unto the fools, Deal not foolishly, and to the wicked, Lift not up your horn on high, speak not with a stiff neck. Now, it talks about a horn here. That's just a figure of speech that denotes power and strength and dominion. Now we come to verse 6, a very important verse. All of the verses are important, but look at this principle here. For promotion comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but God is the judge. He puts down one, he sets up another. You know, people who are scratching and clawing and trying to get to the top are going to pay dearly for that. That's not how to advance. That's not how to grow. That's not how to be blessed and moved up and promoted. Here's how to do it. Verse 6, Psalm 75. For promotion comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but it comes from God. There are people that jockey for power. They want to be the next in line and all that kind of junk. It's politics, and it's do whatever you need to do to get ahead. The best thing to do is just serve God, find out what your job is, do that, and if there's promotion, it comes from God. If there's not promotion, that's okay. You enjoy the blessings God gives you. But don't set out trying to claw your way to the top. That's not where true, successful promotion that is blessed by God comes from. The promotion that is blessed by God comes from Him. And it'll come from Him when He wants to give it, and when it's best, and when it's right, and when it's good for the individual. So don't worry about it. Just go ahead and do what we're supposed to do is the way our attitude ought to be, and leave that in God's hands. He'll take care of it. Now, one other point I want to mention here, it talks about the east and the west and the south, but it doesn't mention the north. And then it talks about God the judge. And there's one of the reasons why we feel that probably the third heaven, where God is on his throne, is out into the northern part of the sky and of the universe. And there are other verses we could go to point that out, but I want to go to Isaiah 14 and verse 13, and you'll see what I mean. Isaiah 14 and verse 13. This, of course, is the example of where Lucifer turned Satan, tried to take over God's throne. Isaiah 14:13, For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will set also up on the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. In other words, I want to take over God's throne. And what does he talk about? In the sides of the north. Then we go back over here to Psalm 75, and it talks about promotion comes neither from the east, from the west, or the south, but God is the judge. So, the direction that was left out about promotion not coming from there was the north. But it comes from where? From God, who it looks like it's saying is coming from the north. So there's an indication. We're not going to just say dogmatically that the third heaven is in the northern part of the universe as we know it, or the skies, but all indications are that it is. And Mr. Armstrong has said that himself, and here's some examples that seem to indicate that. For God is the judge, verse 7. He puts down one and sets up another. And by the way, he's the one who's going to decide who's the president of the United States. He keeps his hands off. He lets man go his own way and do his own thing. But when he needs to, he steps in and intervenes. And the next president will have an impact on the work and on the church and on God's people. And you can be sure that God will have a hand in that and tweak it where he feels like he needs to. That's who the next president's going to be. It's going to be the one that God sets up and allows to be put in that office. Verse 8, For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup, and the wine is red, it is full of mixture, and he pours out of the same. But the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall wring them out and drink them. Have you ever had a glass of wine from a very beautiful, wonderful bottle, and it's just pure and nice and sparkling, and then maybe it wasn't taken care of the way it should have been, and not allowed to season or age the way it should have been, and so you go to have a glass of wine, and all that's left is that which is at the bottom, and maybe you're talking and you pour it and you drink it without looking and you get a bunch of dregs. It's not very good. It's bad. And it's not the best. The wicked get the dregs. They get what's left that's no good. Those that are serving God, they get the good food, the good wine, the good things of life. In the long run for sure, and also along the way. Verse 9, but I will declare forever, I will sing praises to the God of Jacob. Verse 10, all the horns of the wicked also will I cut off, the power, the dominion, the might, the position, the authority. It's coming down. But the horns of the righteous shall be exalted, upheld, and prospered. Psalms chapter 76 and verse 1, in Judah is God known, his name is great in Israel. In Salem also is his tabernacle, and his dwelling place in Zion. I did a little research here on this place, Salem, and just about everywhere I looked, the conclusion was it's talking about Jerusalem, the special city of Jerusalem, where God's tabernacle was brought, and in his dwelling place in Zion, that area is Jerusalem. There break he the arrows of the bow, and the shield and the sword in the battle. Selah. Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey. And in battle, the figurative way of describing it is God is all-powerful, and he wins the battles. Verse 3. Verse 4, you are more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey. The stout-hearted are spoiled. They have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands. What does that mean? Found the use of their hands. They're rendered helpless and hapless because they've disobeyed God. They've not been serving him. They've not obeyed him. They've gone their own way. They've depended on their own might. Verse 6, at your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and the horse are cast into a dead sleep. Doesn't matter how many horses or chariots, when they come against God, they're rendered useless. And quite often, they turn on one another. And quite often, they're sleeping when they ought to be waking up and preparing for battle. You see examples of that in the Bible. Verse 7, you, even you, thou, even thou, are to be feared, and who may stand in your sight when once you are angry? You know, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. We want to be in his hands and serve him, and he says that we are in his hands and no man can snatch us out. But when we're disobeying and we're neglecting our relationship with God and we're turning our back on him, and we get down the road a ways and then fall into his hands, and we are not in his favor, we're in trouble. We don't ever want to be in that position. You, even you, are to be feared, and who may stand in your sight when once you are angry? You did cause judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still. When God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth, Selah, he's going to do that. Sometimes it seems like he never will. Sometimes it seems like it's taken so long, but he'll give us patience, and he'll give us faith to wait, and when we do, he'll come when the time is right, and sometimes it's quicker than we think. But he'll always come. Surely the wrath of man shall praise you, the remainder of wrath shall you restrain. In other words, he's going to turn evil and wickedness around and make it work for him. Even the wrath of man, he'll make it work for him and turn it into praise instead of wrath. Vow or declare or state or promise or decide and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about him bring presents unto him that ought to be feared. And when we give our offerings along with our tithes, that's just like a present you're giving to God. He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth. And the word terrible is not really the right word. Awesome. He is awesome to the kings of the earth, God is. They may think they have power, and they may think they are firmly established, but when God starts to move, they'll find out that they're going to end up being mighty puny compared to him. Now we come to Psalms 77. This is really a tremendous psalm, Psalm 77 and 78. It's about the Exodus and about Israel wandering in the wilderness. And you can read about that over in the book of Exodus and in the book of Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. But it's nice to be able to go through the Bible and verify it in the book of Psalms. And you can also verify it in the book of Acts and in other places and in Hebrews. Look at this, Psalm 77, verse 1. I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me, and he will. When we get done here tonight and you start to turn in, you get on your knees and you pray to God and you talk to him and you thank him and you make requests of him. Just be sure and know that he hears you. He's hearing you. He's going to answer you. Your prayer is like a sweet-smelling incense to him. Verse 2, in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My soul ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. But I sought God. I looked to him. I cried out for help. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed, Selah. It was bearing down on me. It was too much, but I went to God. You hold my eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. Help me. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. And I looked for you, and I cried for you. And I wondered if the Lord would cast off forever, and will he be favorable no more? Verse 7. Is his mercy clean gone forever? Does his promise fail forevermore? I'm in such pain, I'm so overwhelmed, I have questions. Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. And I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. And now I come around, and now I land on my feet, and now I remember. He's always intervened, he's always helped, he's always comforted, he's always strengthened, he's always been there, he always will be there, he hears, he answers, he cares. And that started clarifying everything and settling everything down. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. I will meditate also of all your work and talk of your doings. Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? You see how the book of Psalms often does? It'll start off by analyzing the trouble and then articulating the overwhelming trials and pain and suffering, and then it'll come to the point to where, but wait just a minute, consider this, consider that, remember this, remember that, and look what God did here and there and everywhere, and now I'm comforted, now I'm strengthened, and now I'm guided. And that's what we have to do. Don't forget that. I will meditate also, verse 12, of all your work and talk of your doings. Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? You are the God that does wonders. You have declared your strength among the people. And you know, the wonders he does in our life might not be opening up the Red Sea or cracking open the rock so that water can run out. It might be protecting us in a tough time. It might be giving us a perk here and a job or a break on the job, or giving us favor in the eyes of somebody that was trying to do us harm. It might be settling down a family situation. It might be helping out in a health situation. These are all wonders when you really need them and God delivers them. Yep, they're wonderful, all right. You are the God that does wonders. You have declared your strength among the people. You have with your arm redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. The waters saw you, O God, the waters saw you. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. Speaking of bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt, the clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Your arrows also went abroad. The voice of your thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way is in the sea, and your path in the great waters, and your footsteps are not known. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And you went around, and we couldn't hear your steps. We just knew you were there, and you were taking care of everything at that time among the nation and tribes of Israel. And they were being led by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And now we go right on into Psalm 78, which carries on and gets into more detail regarding Israel and the wilderness and so on. and lessons that we can learn. Notice Psalm 78, verse 1, "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth." You'll see David and Asaph and others who wrote Psalms talk about God's law often. Give ear, O my people. And, of course, he's writing about God here and what God is saying and what God wants us to hear. "Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old." God's inspiring him to write this about him, God, "which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children." So give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. That's representing God. And then verse 2, representing God inspiring this man to write this. Let's take particular note now at verse 3 and the next few verses regarding how we must pass these things on to our children. "I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us." Our fathers today telling children the things of God and the things of the history of the church and of Mr. Armstrong and of their own experiences, without lecturing them and without browbeating them, just communicating it to them. Verse 4, "We will not hide them from their children, showing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children." We're told to teach our children the commandments, the law, the holy days, the word of God. Take time to do it. I hope we are, and I'm sure we are. I hope we are. We're to do this. It's to be passed on from generation to generation, carefully and continually and constantly. The ministers can't do it all themselves. The parents have to do it. In fact, they're the main source of it. "That the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children." What? All these things. The praises of God, his strength, his wonderful works that he has done, the law that he appointed to Israel, the interventions, the mighty works and miracles and wonders that he performed. Verse 6, "That the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart right, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God." And we don't want our children to be like that. And we don't want to be like that, so we have to take this warning. "The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle." And Ephraim was one of the most courageous tribes in Israel in battle. But they got so far away from God, they turned their back in battle and went the other way instead of going forward. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law, Ephraim, and forgot his works and his wonders that he had showed them. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers, in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. Look at this. Look at this historic record here that you can compare with other parts of the Bible. And sit down with your children and go through this section and just see how it's all consistent. It all agrees. And yet it's written hundreds and even thousands of years apart as far as the date of the writing and the date that it was recounted and recorded. "He divided the sea," verse 13, "and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as a heap. In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He clave the rocks in the wilderness, and gave them drink as out of the great depths. He brought streams also out of the rock, and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempted or tested God in their heart by asking meat for their lust, not meat for our needs, but they lusted for it. Yea, they spoke against God. They said, Can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Behold, he smote the rock, that the waters gushed out, and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was wroth. He was angry, and rightly so. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came against Israel, because they believed not in God and trusted not in his salvation. Did you know it's an insult to God when we don't believe in Him and when we don't trust Him? He wants us to believe Him. He wants us to trust in Him, because then that leads to obedience, which then leads to blessings. But they didn't do that, and so they disobeyed, and that brought curses. Verse 23, though He had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven and done so much for them, and had rained down manna upon them to eat, and had given them of the corn of heaven, or the bread of heaven, or the grain of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. Not that angels need to eat food, but in the sense that it came down from heaven. Let me just see here what the Revised Standard Version says about that. Man ate of the bread of the angels. He sent them food in abundance. So angels are spirit beings, and they don't need to eat, but manna from heaven, you see. Perhaps God used the angels to put the food where He wanted it. He sent them meat to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by His power He brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea. And He let it fall in the midst of their camp, round about their habitations. So they did eat and were filled, for He gave them their own desire. They were not estranged from their lust. They were not restrained from their craving, or deprived. They were not deprived from their cravings. But while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came upon them and slew the fattest of them, and smote down the chosen men of Israel, because He saw their hateful, horrible attitude of lust and coveting. It wasn't an attitude of being thankful and appreciating what God had done in sending them this meat and giving Him the thanks, but just grabbing it and devouring it and wanting more and consuming it on their lust. And God got so disgusted with them that He smote them down. And you can read about that in other books of the Old Testament, like, for instance, Numbers. Verse 32, for all this they sinned still and believed not for His wondrous works. They just kept on sinning. They didn't learn their lesson. Therefore their days did He consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When He slew them, then they sought Him, and they returned and inquired early after God. Okay, we're going to do it right now, God. We've learned our lessons. We're sorry. Now we'll do whatever You say. And they remembered that God was their rock, and the high God their Redeemer, and it was just such wonderful words and such flowery songs and speeches. But look at this, verse 36, nevertheless they did flatter Him with their mouth, and they lied unto Him with their tongues. They didn't mean it. It wasn't from the heart. And as soon as they got to wanting something else and didn't have it, they'd rebel and start accusing God and want to kill Moses, and there they were in that same old foul, rotten attitude again. For their heart was not right with Him, neither were they steadfast in His covenant. But God understood that they were carnal human beings, and He's so merciful and so kind and so full of love and so forgiving. Even though He punished them, He still wants them to be in His kingdom. And when they would cry out, He would forgive them and hope for the best, and then they'd get back in the cycle of rebellion again. Notice here in verse 38 how merciful and loving God is in the face of their rebellion and their flattery and their deceit and their lies. But He, being full of compassion, verse 38, forgave their iniquity, destroyed them not. Yea, many a time turned He His anger away, and did not stir up all His wrath. And Moses, coming before Him and falling on his face before Him and crying out and begging Him and praying to Him, would move God to back off from what He intended to do. You can read about that over and over again in places like Exodus and Leviticus and especially Numbers. For He remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passes away and comes not again. How often did they provoke Him in the wilderness and grieve Him in the desert? Yea, they turned back and tempted God, and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not His hand, nor the day when He delivered them from the enemy, how He had wrought His signs in Egypt, and His wonders in the field of Zoan. And such signs and wonders they were. You'd think that nobody would ever forget all of those incredible things that He did for them. But they did, and we forget what He does for us if we're not careful. And had turned their rivers into blood, and their floods, or their streams, that they could not drink. He sent divers sort of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them. Remember this? Look what a tremendous, accurate history this is. He gave also their increase unto the caterpillar, and their labor unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave up their cattle also to the hail and their flocks to hot thunderbolts. You know, when we get to the time of the Passover and Days of Unleavened Bread, it'd be a good family Bible study to turn over here and everybody get your Bible out and just go through Psalm 78. What a tremendous historical narrative this is. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath and indignation and trouble by sending evil angels among them, or allowing demons to get involved in some of the topsy-turvy things that were going on. Just like today in this world, there's so many horrible things take place. I can't help but believe that sometimes demons are involved. People just do inhumane things, get out of control, and just like mobs go rampaging through and don't even know what they're doing and why they're doing it. That smacks of demonism to me. He made a way to his anger, a path. It couldn't be blocked off. He spared not their soul from death. Sometimes that's the only choice he had, is to simply wipe them out and keep the rebellion from spreading, but gave their life over to the pestilence or the plague, and smote all the firstborn of Egypt, the chief of their strength in the tabernacles of Ham, but made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they feared not, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies. Remember that all happening? He brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain, which his right hand had purchased. He cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. And so they went over into Jordan, and settled into the promised land, and everything went well for a long time under Joshua. And then when he died and those that he trained died, they just went right back into depravity, as bad, if not worse, than ever before. Verse 55, he cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God, and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places, and moved him to jealousy with their graven images, pagan to the core, just as pagan as the nations around them. When God heard this, he was wroth, and greatly abhorred Israel, who turned their back on him after he'd done all he did for them, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hands. And they were taken away and made captives, and they were diminished and defeated so often, because they turned their back on him. He gave his people over also unto the sword, and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. There was no deliverance for them, because they would not obey him after they'd had so many blessings and had so many opportunities to do so. Are we learning lessons from this, brethren? I think we are. We want to make sure that we're consistent in our service to God, and we learn lessons from our mistakes and don't keep repeating them. We put him first, not like the Israelites, who just kept on repeating the same old rebellious mistakes no matter what God did for them. Then the Lord awakened as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man that shouts by reason of wine, and he smote his enemies in the hinder parts. That's because they were running, and so he smote them anyway. He put them to a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim. They didn't step up when they were supposed to, but chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion which he loved. And of course, out of Judah came Jesus Christ. And Judah became one of the chief tribes, the one with the scepter promise, the law. And in spite of all they did, he still preserved the descendants of Abraham like he promised he would. And he built his sanctuary, verse 69, like high palaces, like the earth which he has established forever. He chose David also his servant from the tribe of Judah, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the ewes. Great with young he brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. And David did do that, and he'll do it in the kingdom of God as a magnificent spirit being and king under Jesus Christ. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands. And that finishes up Psalm chapter 78. What a fantastic chapter in the Bible Psalm 78 is. What a overview of history. The breadth of it is breathtaking. And look how it ends up. It ends up right back with David, taking care of Israel in his day, and he took care of them in his day. And because of that, and him being a man after God's own heart, David will be king over them under Jesus Christ, the King, in the kingdom of God in the world tomorrow. So we'll stop there, and we'll begin the next Bible study with Psalms chapter 79. This is Charles Bryce with the Enduring Church of God.